Hello everyone, welcome to the NPTEL course on Materials Informatics. I am Sai Gautam Gopalakrishnan. I am an assistant professor at the Department of Materials Engineering, Indian Institute of Science. My contact details are listed here. So let's get started with the course. And before I go into the course contents, I want to acknowledge the people who have contributed to this course in terms of both content and structuring this course. So I want to acknowledge my research group here, and this picture was taken in June 2025. And this course will have 3 TAs. Shugat is one, Preetham is the second, and Javeed is the third teaching assistant who will be helping out with some of the hands-on sessions and other resources that will be part of this course. Alright, so if you are not from a materials background or if you have not taken metallurgy or material science in your undergrad, you may be wondering why bother about material science, right? So what is the relevance of material science? So the key message is that if you take any device that you are using, the performance of the device is almost always going to be dictated by the kinds of materials that you actually use within that device. So for example, I am showing a schematic of a simple lithium ion battery here, and these lithium ion batteries are powering your portable electronics, so your cell phones, your laptops, all the way to your electric vehicles, right? And this lithium ion battery consists of 3 components. So you have the anode here, you have the cathode here, separated by a liquid electrolyte here, right? Now in terms of how efficiently or how well this lithium ion battery performs, you can define some performance metrics, right? So you can think about how much energy you can store within your battery per capita, right? And you can also think about how much power you can extract from your battery, again per capita, per mass or per volume. And these are referred to as performance metrics, right? And if you actually think about what influences or what determines these performance metrics, the key bottlenecks are almost always the kinds of materials you use as your anode and your cathode and sometimes as your electrolyte, right? So the kinds of materials you use clearly dictate the kinds of properties that or performance that you can extract from your application or device, right? And what kinds of materials properties actually influences these energy and power densities? Things are things like how stable your anode and cathode are, how quickly ions can actually move within your electrodes, and what kind of energies you can actually extract when your anode or cathode undergo a chemical reaction, right? So these are the kinds of properties that govern your performance metrics of your application, right, of your battery. Analogously, you can also think of performance metrics within a photovoltaic cell. These are your solar cells that you use on your rooftops, for example, right? So the efficiency of a photovoltaic cell or a solar cell is very largely dependent on the choice of semiconductor and the choice of material you use as the light absorber. So you need a material to absorb sunlight and generate electrons and holes, and that's how you generate electricity from your solar cell, right? And this efficiency of your solar cell is once again dependent on the key material properties of the semiconductor that you actually use in your device, such as your band gap, so your stability, so how stable your material is, and the resistance of the semiconductor to the formation of point defects, right? So in any, and we can sort of extend this exercise to other devices, other applications as well. So in any application, its performance metrics are bottlenecked, are primarily determined by the kinds of materials that you actually use in those applications or devices. Now the takeaway message is that if you now start using better materials for different applications, you can actually get better performance, right? So for example, you can improve your energy and power densities in your batteries, or you can improve the efficiency of your photovoltaic device by improving the materials that you are actually using. So by using better materials, you can actually extract better performance from these applications, right? Now why bother about or why use machine learning in the field of material science? So in the last slide we understood that we have to use better materials in order to extract better performance, right? So where does machine learning come into the picture here, right? So on this chart I am showing different sort of technologies here and how they evolved with time. So on the x-axis you see time in the form of decades, right. So the blue bars are indicative of how much time was actually invented in the invention or development of the technology, and the orange bars are referring to how much time it took in commercialization. So when you actually have the product available in the market, right. Now typically this kinds of technological innovation and deployment is a fairly slow process, right. So any simple technology takes decades from innovation all the way to commercialization, so when you can actually buy the product, right, and it is often limited by the kinds of materials that you use or that you discover. So for example, in the case of lithium ion batteries, you actually need to discover new electrode materials for that battery infrastructure to become practical, and that took several decades, right. So technological innovation is often limited by the materials that you materials innovation or materials discovery that you actually need to make that product a reality. And the sort of other highlight is that this technological innovation is particularly slow in the energy generation sector. So the bottom portion of this graph refers to different energy technologies ranging from nuclear power, solar photovoltaics to wind, right, and here innovation is particularly slow, right. So if you want to think about moving towards sustainable energy technologies, reducing our carbon emissions and so on, we need to innovate in the energy sector, energy generation or energy storage sector, and here innovation is particularly slow compared to other sectors such as entertainment, consumer products and so on. So the key sort of takeaway here is that if we find ways of or if we find faster ways of discovering new or better materials, we can actually accelerate these technological innovation cycles. So we can make these innovation cycles shorter, right, and this is where machine learning can play a key role, because you can now try to model different material properties and we can try to predict which materials can be suitable, right, for different applications. So having better materials helps us get better performance, and having better materials faster helps us develop products faster, and this is where machine learning comes in, because machine learning can help us identify better materials faster. Alright, so in a key role or a key innovation that happened over the last decade or so that enabled the use of machine learning within material science is the US Materials Genome Initiative, and this is similar to the sort of human genomics initiative that the US government initiated in the past, right. So the key idea is to perform a large set of computations as well as experiments to gather data, so to get different properties of different materials, and then these databases basically will act as the base for usage of machine learning initiatives or machine learning models, right. So the Materials Genome Initiative played a big role. So it was officially launched in 2011 and it was renewed in about 2018 or so, so it's still going strong, and there are several databases that have emerged because of this Materials Genome Initiative, some of which we will actually use over the course of this this course as well, right. So although machine learning and its use cases in material science have been fairly recent, so we have started using them in about 1.5–2 decades or so, but modeling of materials has a fairly long standing history, right, and in this slide we will look at how modeling of materials, of different materials, has actually evolved over time to get a sense of perspective of where we stand now. I would say the first major breakthrough in modeling of materials came in 1924. This is when the Lennard-Jones interatomic potential was sort of mathematically described, and we will see later in the course that Lennard-Jones is one of the most fundamental interatomic potentials that helps describe interactions between two atoms in a solid, right. It is a very simple functional form, but it still has use cases, it still has applications even to the modern day, right. So 1924 was when this interatomic potential was formulated, and this marks the first, I would say the first major breakthrough when it comes to modeling of different materials. The next breakthrough took a few decades, so it came in the year 1957 when Alder and Wainwright demonstrated that you can use hard sphere model. So you basically model atoms in a solid as hard spheres, and they performed what are referred to as molecular dynamics simulations with this hard sphere system, and they demonstrated that you can actually that material can actually undergo a phase transition. Right. So what's a phase transition? Phase transition is change of structure, change of properties, and so on that occur in a given material. So in 1957 was the first sort of practical demonstration of computational and simulation tools to model a genuine materials phenomenon, right. So that was 1957, and the next breakthrough came about 7 years later when Hohenberg and Kohn established what is now referred to as the density function theory. So they established the mathematical foundations in their remarkable paper in 1964, and to this day density function theory acts as the bedrock of data. Right. So whenever you think about machine learning, you also have to think about what kinds of data you need to build models, and we need to generate that data. So density function theory is often used as the tool for generating that data. 1975 was when sort of physics based lattice models had a big breakthrough. So if you think about modeling magnetic systems, sort of Ising models are very common in modeling their interactions, magnetic interactions, transitions from ferro to paramagnetic systems, and so on, and those Ising models were generalized to other configurational properties within materials. So again, think about phase transitions, think about how materials sort of evolve as temperature increases, and so on, and these physics based lattice models are very important in modeling such systems and such transitions. And in 1975 was when the cluster expansion framework, the so called cluster expansion framework, was sort of properly formulated mathematically. I mean, there were other developments that happened, but 75 marked sort of a watershed moment in the development of physics based lattice models, and these lattice models are still used to this day, and we will sort of cover some of these lattice models also in as we go through this course. The next breakthrough came in 1986, so about a decade later after 1975, and this was when the Stillinger-Weber potential was devised and demonstrated for silicon, right. So Stillinger-Weber sort of exhibits a significant upgrade from Lennard-Jones interatomic potential. So this is an interatomic potential that is used for modeling the interactions between atoms in a solid. And these potentials are still used commercially to this day. So this is once again a very important advancement in the modeling of materials. And then the next major development that happened in 96 is actually a follow up to this development here in 1964 when density function theory was formulated. So in 1996, so if you are familiar with the sort of general framework of density function theory, one of the key sort of approximations there is what is referred to as an exchange correlation functional. And exchange correlation functional refers to the quantum mechanical interactions that happen within a system, and in 1996 there was a very simple exchange correlation functional that was formulated by Perdue, Bokeh, and Ernst here, and to this day a lot of materials databases use this exchange correlation functional with DFT to predict material properties. So 96 marked a major moment in the prediction of material properties and modeling of materials. The next sort of significant advancement came in 1999, which was when projector augmented wave potentials were introduced in the software called VASP, or Vienna Ab Initio Simulation Package, and to this day VASP or Vienna Ab Initio Simulation Package is the sort of bedrock tool that we use to calculate material properties. And this was this breakthrough in 1999 was very important for the development of VASP and again the modeling of materials. Right. The next major breakthrough came in about 2003, right. So up to the sort of very early 2000s, doing density function theory was particularly hard. So you needed not only knowledge of physics that went into the construction of density function theory, but you also needed to be adept at using computational tools, high performance computing architectures and so on to do even a very simple single DFT calculation, density function theory calculations. And in 2003 there were two remarkable papers that show that you can actually automate a lot of these tasks, right. So you can actually take density function theory codes that were available and you can create workflows to perform these density function theory calculations in a high throughput fashion. So what we mean by high throughput is a large number of calculations across a wide variety of systems are done in parallel, right. And these two papers basically demonstrated that you can actually perform these calculations high throughput. So this is a very important sort of innovation that happened in the modeling of material science, where we can actually predict properties of a wide range of materials very quickly. And in 2007 was when sort of modern machine learning techniques were used for the first time in material science. So this was the development of neural network based interatomic potentials. So this is again an update to 1986 here when the Stillinger-Weber was actually formulated. So in 2007 modern neural networks were used to describe the interactions between atoms in a solid, right, and this was done by Baylor and Parinello here. So 2007 marked the first major breakthrough in the usage of neural networks within material science. 2011 was when the US Materials Genome Initiative was begun, as I mentioned in my previous slide, and this Materials Genome Initiative gave rise to a lot of different databases. So this is Materials Project, this is OQMD for example, and other databases as well, and these databases contain mostly computed properties of different materials. There are also experimental databases out there which contain experimentally measured properties of different materials. So these 7 years were very important in the generation of data, which now influences how we model materials and their properties. And the final major breakthrough I would say came in around 2018 or so, when graph based networks, or what we refer to as graph neural networks, were used to model materials. And it turns out that graphs sort of have a very intuitive way of describing materials, because materials often contain periodic arrangement of atoms in 3 dimensions, and you can actually mimic this arrangement with graphs. And the usage of graph networks to model material properties has enabled us to create very accurate models, both for describing atomic interactions within a given material and also describing the way properties are related to structures of different materials. So graph networks have made remarkable breakthroughs and have really advanced the way we actually model materials and their underlying properties, and this is still an ongoing sort of advancement. So there are breakthroughs that keep coming in every year, every 6 months or so, and hopefully this will keep adding on more meaningful breakthroughs as we go in the near future. Alright, so now that we have understood a little bit of history of how modeling and machine learning in material science have made a mark, let's look at what types of machine learning we typically encounter in material science. The first is what I refer to as regression models. So think of these as making property predictions with simple inputs, right. So let's say you have a structure and you want to predict some property related to the structure. That could be a band gap, that could be formation energy and so on, or it could also be a composition dependent sort of prediction, right. So here you try to make predictions of different properties of a given material across a wide range of materials, so oxides, sulfides, metals, non-metals and so on, right. And these are there are also classification tasks that are often clubbed into this category. So where you want to classify, let's say, a given material as either a metal or a non-metal, or a given material as stable or non-stable or not stable and so on, right. So regressions still play a key role, because we want at the end of the day properties of a material govern how different applications actually perform, and it is important for us to predict properties accurately of different materials. So regressions still play a key role in the types of are a key part of the type of machine learning that is typically used in material science. The second type of machine learning that's often used is lattice models and interatomic potentials. So these refer to the interactions between atoms in a given solid, right. So for example, this is a typical sort of workflow that is often used in the construction of interatomic potentials, and when you want to construct lattice models, you typically have a decorated lattice to describe the influence of different configurations on the properties of a material, right. So lattice models and interatomic potentials have a range of complexity. So some of them are heavily reliant on physics, so they are simpler models, so they use simple machine learning techniques, and some of them are reliant on graph based models, so they are more heavy in terms of their machine learning complexity, and hence require more significant machine learning architectures, algorithms, workflows and so on, right. They are also typically more data hungry, right. So lattice models and interatomic potentials are play a big role in the type of machine learning that is typically used in material science, and often these lattice models and interatomic potentials are constructed to describe one material or a few set of materials very accurately, right. So accuracy is the key here, and not their ability to generalize across different systems. And then we have what are referred to as advanced topics. So here this advanced topics refer to the new kinds of machine learning architectures that are being used in material science and sometimes being experimented with material science. So for example, if you look at generative models, let's say you give a set of properties and you actually want the model to predict a material instead of the other way around. So typically we give materials to a model and then ask it to predict properties, but let's say you want to do the inverse approach. So you give properties and you want to predict materials, you typically have to create generative models, and these use the principle of diffusion. So diffusion not in the classic material sense, diffusion in the machine learning sense, right. And often these days we also have the usage of language models within material science. These language models have a variety of tasks, right from automating simple experimental tasks to generating of structures, right. And then you also have the idea of transfer learning. So transfer learning is very useful or very important in material science, simply because materials is a fairly data limited domain. We typically don't deal with millions of data points. We have few thousands or few hundreds of thousands at best, right. So here transfer learning can play a key role because we can actually learn structure property correlations of a certain type and then try to learn other more difficult to learn structure property correlations using transfer learning, right. So these are sort of ideas or models that are that have some use cases that are being experimented and are at the cutting edge. Okay. So these are the sort of this is a broad overview of the types of machine learning that are used in material science. All right. So now let's also think about where the data comes from, right. So if you think about machine learning as the engine, you need something as the fuel, right. So data is the fuel for the machine learning engine. And I would say the two key sources of data that we often rely on for building machine learning models are density function theory calculations. I'm just illustrating that with the SchrodingerSCAT post here, and also molecular dynamics simulations. Typically used, we use this package called LAMMPS, or there are also other packages that are available to perform molecular dynamics simulations. So you generate data from systematic density function theory calculations or molecular dynamics simulations and use that data to train your models. Right. You can also do high throughput experiments and generate data from there and feed them into your machine learning workflows. So this is an example of a workflow that was actually used a few years back, and there are similar workflows that have been coming up in the recent past. And we can also use databases that are already available, right. So many of these databases have computed data, so computed using density function theory and sometimes using molecular dynamics, right. And some of them have high throughput experimental data as well. So ICSD, for example, has a lot of structural data that has been compiled over decades, right. So there are a lot of different databases. Some of them are licensed and some of them are free. Right. So we try to use whichever data is available to us, right, in the form of these databases. And sometimes these databases will also have these types of leaderboards, right. So where they list the different types of properties and which models sort of work on those properties, which models work best on those properties, right. And then when it comes to sort of organizing all the data, we typically use Python based tools or APIs to query the data and get it on the fly. For all the machine learning aspects, we will use Python. I mean, Python is typically used in the in the material science community, and we will also be using Python in this course. Okay, so now that I have motivated the importance of this course enough, let's look at how the course is structured. So the course is structured into 3 modules. So in the first module we'll deal with the basics, right? So we'll talk about how typical regression classification workflows are done in machine learning, and how supervised machine learning is also done, and we'll have use cases or test cases with materials data sets or materials based problems. We'll also talk about deep learning, so how neural networks are structured in general, how convolutions are done or what use convolutions have in neural network architectures, and also talk about graph based neural networks at the end. So this forms our first module, the basics. The second module is sort of adding physics to our modeling, right? So where we can get physics based information put into our models. So here we will also talk about density functional theory and molecular dynamics. So I will cover some of the basics and give you some glimpses of how data can be generated. So once again, data generation is as equally equally important as the model building itself. So we need to also understand how data is generated, right? So and that's where density functional theory and molecular dynamics sort of plays a role. I will also give an overview of statistical mechanics, right, because these statistical mechanics techniques are important for understanding how lattice models work, right. So with these statistical mechanics techniques, I will then focus on lattice models and also talk about how we use coarse graining principles to generate material properties, right. So that's in module 2. And then module 3 we will do some advanced topics. So we will start with machine learning interatomic potentials. So we will discuss both sort of classical machine learning interatomic potentials and also more modern versions of them, and how they can be generalized to so called universal or foundational machine learning models. We will also talk about some transfer learning ideas with specific importance to property predictions. And then we will also look at some of the cutting edge works on diffusion and language models and other recent developments as and when they come. So this is how the course is structured, and in terms of time, we will probably spend about the first 5 weeks or so on the basics, and then the 4 weeks on the physics, and then the 3 weeks on the cutting edge, right. Things can get a little bit redistributed, but this is the sort of rough overview of the timelines. In terms of other logistics, so this is a full 12-week 30-hour course, and we will have hands-on sessions through this course. I would say roughly about once in 3 or 4 lectures or so. Maybe in the beginning we will have more lectures and then we will have hands-on sessions, but as we go along there will be more frequent hands-on sessions. And these hands-on sessions are especially important because we will actually go through code blocks and illustrate how or what is the purpose of each code block, what type of modifications you typically have to do within the code blocks to tailor to tailor them to your specific problem or specific objectives, right. And we will rely on Python based Jupyter notebooks for these hands-on sessions, right. And the evaluation of the course will be done as per NPTEL norms, which you will be able to find on the NPTEL website. With respect to prerequisites of the course, I would say a bunch of basic knowledge is what is needed. So one is basic knowledge of material science. So if you are from metallurgy or material science undergraduate program or graduate program, then you have all the tools that you need. But if you are not from material science, so let's say you are a mechanical engineer or chemical engineer, aerospace engineer, and you are interested in this course, I would say some knowledge of crystal structure. So if I say something like body centered cubic or face centered cubic structure, if that makes sense to you, I think you are at home in this course, right. So basic knowledge of crystal structure I think is important, and some knowledge of thermodynamics. So if I say stability, metastability, instability, that makes sense, right. And then some idea of structure property correlations. So one example is if you take carbon, right. So carbon has a diamond form and a graphite form. Graphite is an electrical conductor, but diamond is an electrical insulator. Why do these two structural forms have different properties, right. So this is a very simple example of a structure property correlation. So if you have an idea of how structures are related to different properties, that really helps things, right. So basic knowledge of material science is I would say a prerequisite, because we won't cover that in detail in this course. Basic engineering mathematics, so some knowledge of linear algebra is good, it is not a must but it is good, it helps you understand how let's say back propagation works, you know, how overfitting underfitting happens in simple models and so on, and some differential integral calculus will also be knowledge of that will be helpful. Of course these two are not a must, you can also pick them along as you go through this course. And then basic programming exposure, I think this is more important than the first two prerequisites. It is preferable that you have some exposure to Python and the ability to handle Jupyter notebooks. So we will be giving you all the required environmental files and all the notebooks themselves to help you sort of execute and learn through those notebooks, but the ability to actually operate them in your laptop or tablet is important. So we hope that you will be able to get this expertise in a parallel course. Okay, and with respect to references, so the course material itself should be self-sufficient, but if you want to read some textbooks on the side, these are the sort of textbooks that you should refer to. In module 1, when we actually go through the basics, I will actually be following this book very closely, so Hands-on Machine Learning with Scikit-learn, Keras and TensorFlow by Aurélien Geron. This is a very nice book, fantastically written, and it has great illustrations and very good Jupyter notebooks. Right, so we'll actually be using some of those, we'll be using modified versions of some of those notebooks, and I'll use some of those illustrations from Aurélien Geron in my lecture as well. And then computational material science is a great book to start if you are getting into computational techniques and their applications into material science. This is a slightly old book, but it is a fantastic book to read and get the basics. And then for module 2, when we actually go about the physics, right, so these 3 books would be useful. So understanding molecular simulations, so this is a fantastic book for understanding molecular dynamics. Electronic structure, basics and theory, again this is a great book for understanding density function theory. And then statistical mechanics, of course, is a great book for statistical mechanics. So module 1, this book is great. Module 2, these 4 books are very good, and for module 3 we don't really have textbooks, so I'll share links to relevant research articles as and when they are important. Okay, in summary, I think we went through the importance of materials innovation and how machine learning can actually help in this lecture. We also looked at how modeling has evolved over the decades in material science, and what types of machine learning applications you typically have or come across in material science. We went through some of the course content, their structure and a few logistics, and of course if there are more logistics that come across in the future, we you know, it will be communicated via the NPTEL resources. So with that we will close out this lecture, and in the next lecture I will talk about some of the terminologies associated with machine learning. With that, see you.